Now, before getting into this, I'd just like us all to consider the possibility for a second that this adaptation of Five Nights at Freddy's, a title that has captivated fans for years, could easily become a shining example of what the words faithful and respectful actually mean.
Is that like a personal attack or something?
When you say that you're going to redo, revamp, or adapt a popular piece of media and add that modern touch. And while initial reviews from the critics have deemed it nothing more than a torturous experience for audiences rather than a delight for the more sadistic types out there, many who have gone out to indulge in the hype have been pleasantly surprised by the first cinematic showing for Freddy and his pals.
Cool. Cool.
And quite simply, that's because this movie, to my knowledge, stayed loyal and understanding of its previous works and lore, which would have always been a sticking point for fans of Freddy's, but with this, we are offered something tangible, sincere, and brutal to follow, especially for viewers who are unfamiliar with the franchise, and even better, without half of the campiness or unnecessary gore that its carbon copy Willy's Wonderland offered. And the reason I bring this up is because the critics are bashing it for being unoriginal, when it's one of a kind for me, drawing little inspiration as far as I can tell from other titles beside itself. But those same critics are the ones who will jump up and down saying that the latest mindfucks from Disney and Snow White and the Little Mermaid are exactly what the world needs, while attempting to quell the fires of titles like this and Sound of Freedom.
No, he's got a point.
What's even more ridiculous here, though, is that when you look at the latest imagery to come from Disney's poor attempts at people-pleasing and pandering, you question how this was even on the budget of anything more than $50. Whereas Five Nights at Freddy's had a budget of roughly $20 million and they managed to achieve all this. A gripping, suspenseful and loyal artistic endeavour that uses physical animatronics, practical set design, on-location filming and genuine consideration for a story that is comprised of a few plot holes admittedly, but is an earnest attempt at presenting an enjoyable feature, packed with nostalgic imagery, simple but effective scares, and while it's saddled on the back of a predictable plot, it never lets up with intrigue and demonstrates the joys you can find spending Five Nights with Freddy.
Let's introduce you to the stars of the show. Adorable, aren't they?
Now, the plot of this one follows Mike Schmidt, an out-of-luck security guard who carries a degree of trauma behind him after losing his little brother Garrett to a mass murderer in his youth.
Oh, how unfortunate!
And following the loss of his parents in the present, is stuck looking after his kid's sister and is facing the possibility of losing her and their home due to their Aunt Jane, who is seeking custody of her for more monthly checks under the ruse of incompetence against Mike.
Missy, come here, you fat-mouthed little stupid bitch.
And with the pressure mounting, he's forced to accept a new job from his career counsellor Steve, who offers a night guard position at the famous Freddy Fazbear's Pizzeria, a derelict building that was thrown into closure following its connection to the disappearance and murder of several children during the 80s. And after a couple of odd nights where Mike falls asleep and experiences changes in his dreams with the appearance of 5 random children who begin to attack and interact with him, leaving marks which translate into reality, it's here where he meets local officer Vanessa
Hot diggity dog.
who has an awareness of Freddy's and the history of high turnovers from security there, but also a nostalgic relationship with the Pizzaplex from her youth too. And after giving him the lowdown on Freddy's for why it closed, we see that Aunt Jane is concocting a plan with Abby's babysitter Max and her friends, where they plan to get Mike done for incompetence at Freddy's by trashing a place that will get him fired and cause him to lose custody of Abby to Jane.
Stupid bitch.
However, when this band of morons, including Max, get taken out by the animatronics at Freddy's, Mike is forced to bring Abby with him on the third night, where she meets Freddy and the gang, who embrace her but are hostile toward Mike, who learns that the bots are inhabited by the souls of the missing children from Vanessa's story. And on the fourth night, Vanessa joins them and deduces that Mike is trying to use the spirits to figure out who took Garrett way back when, as he disappeared when they did too. But fearing what could happen to Abby, she insists that Mike doesn't bring her back here or engage with the bots in the same way again, and we see her fears prove to become real later on when Mike leaves Abby with Jane while he returns to Freddy's to talk to the spirits, who offer Mike a dream state each night instead of the killer's identity, as they don't know themselves other than the memory of a rabbit, and the spirits state that he can be with Garrett and his parents again, but at the cost of Abby, who would belong to them in exchange for this.
What the fuck?
And after initially agreeing to this deal, he realizes what he would be losing and tries to renege on it, but the animatronics begin to attack him as a result of this decision. And after just escaping Foxy, he is saved by Vanessa, who reveals that she knew about all of this and explains that they act on the instruction of the mass murderer himself, William Afton, who killed the 5 children that inhabit the suits, as well as Garrett, and out of guilt, she keeps an eye on the bots after William stuffed the children's bodies inside each of them. Oh, and she also tells Mike that she's his daughter.
Excuse me, the fuck did you just say?
And as Mike realizes he gave up Abby, he rushes to save her as Golden Freddy is sent to collect her and murders Jane.
Wow, what a waste.
And we see back at the restaurant that Chica tries to kill Abby by making her one of them, but Mike intercepts just in time, leading to a chase where she is saved by Vanessa. And after escaping Cupcake, Mike runs into Springtrap. The yellow rabbit shown throughout the movie is the one the kids remember before their deaths. And as he lays the smackdown on Mike, it's revealed his career counselor Steve Raglan is inside the suit, and it's actually William Afton.
You didn't see that coming.
And after Mike initially took them down, William calls the children to action and orders them to begin killing Mike, but Abby realizes they need to know the truth, so quickly sketches out William murdering the spirits and pins it to the wall, giving the kids clarity where they turn on him, and after Cupcake compromises the Springtrap suit, it triggers the gears inside which begin impaling William and merging with his body.
Did you die?
I got shot.
But did you die?
And we close on the animatronics dragging him deeper into the building as it collapses around him, while Mike and Abby help an injured Vanessa out, who was stabbed by William during the melee, who enters a coma shortly after, and Mike and Abby continue to live their lives as normal while William is seen suffering and trying to cling to life, with Freddy's spirit shutting the door on him.
Okay, fuckity bye.
Now, in 2023 alone, it has been stacked with video game adaptations that made their way to screens with the release of The Witcher, Twisted Metal, Super Mario Bros., The Last of Us, Gran Turismo, and now this. And while video game adaptations have had a checkered past with drawbacks and successes between the various titles and franchises over the years, no singular time has proven to be more evident of the ups and downs they endure than in 2023. The Witcher fell on deaf ears due to the writers choosing to go into business for themselves, feeling that loyalty to the source material wasn't necessary, which caused its lead star to quit.
What are you, fucking stupid?
Twisted Metal has fallen out of discussions for simply being too niche to my understanding, though it was generally well received.
You are correct, sir.
Last of Us was accepted kindly but not without its criticisms due to certain changes and overindulgent moments that took away from the duo we actually sat down for, and the ending felt especially rushed in places that it left things feeling rather devoid of resolution.
We're on the verge of greatness. We were this close.
And Super Mario Bros. Became the highest grossing title of the year before Barbie for hosting a simple plot that overindulged in fan service, which did nothing but bolster audience and fan reception for being a family-friendly piece of entertainment that battled against the critics who didn't care for it because it wasn't controversial enough.
Go fuck yourself. Go fuck yourself. Go fuck yourself.
And lastly, Gran Turismo was possibly the epitome of stretching a concept for a narrative despite positive reception for it.
You have to do is believe.
I don't believe it'll ever be a cult classic when you look back on the video game adaptations, but they're all here now. So where does that leave FNAF? Well, as always, it's subjective, as it's what you choose to make of it, but after watching it with my brother on opening day, who is a huge Five Nights at Freddy's fan, his belief is that if you knew the lore, understood the characters and world building, and were comfortable with a few alterations to character connections, you'll have an absolute blast with this. But for the general viewer, they might struggle beyond it being simply another laxed horror movie. And while I can understand this, my feelings are that if you have limited or practically no knowledge of the FNAF franchise, you can still have a good time with it. The film does attempt to balance a lot of plot elements that could have been stretched for another movie or two, but I do believe it was a solid entry to both the horror and video game genres in cinema. Though I would argue that people saying it falls under the horror slasher genre are woefully misguided, as it never steps beyond a few jump scares and cutaway kills, similar to the likes of Happy Death Day for example in its use of the horror aspects, though it never is as intimate as those labels would suggest. But regarding the intricacies of this movie, there's aspects I enjoyed, aspects I thought that were okay, and elements that are still a mystery to rather honestly confusing. Though I don't have a deep awareness for FNAF, so if I'm missing something or it was answered elsewhere, then feel free to let me know in the comments. But to start, I want to break down three aspects in exactly the way I just described, where one aspect I enjoyed, another was okay, and one was just a complete fucking mystery to me.
Bring it on.
Starting with the antagonists of this movie in Freddy and his pals, who were executed brilliantly both narratively and physically, with the designers using a blend of animatronics and warm bodies for close-ups, I believe, to present these compelling, expressionate, fierce, misunderstood and intimidating monsters that are just lost souls, confused and bound to serve a madman. These bots were surprisingly leveled out with a tragic backstory and were offered the chance to emote through their facial mechanics and minor interactions with Mike and Abby, informing us that while they're bots for entertainment, they became much more than that once Afton allowed the kids to take over them following their remnants being placed inside.
This is a pretty hardcore origin story.
There's a decent amount of expression from the various animatronics that conveys what they're thinking each time, whether it be their eyes, brow movements or framing, which was vital to enhance the effect of them as the scale switches them from imposing to innocent extremely well, informing us of what they're planning in that moment, with Cupcake offering the biggest moments to my surprise, given he's just a fucking cake. But you can tell the creators really liked him given the amount of squeeze he puts on Mike and the thieves themselves throughout the rest of this and how active he becomes overall. But despite the animatronics never being the core of this movie as that went to Mike, they were rather charming renditions of the ghouls with gears from the games, and while used sparingly were effective when they made an appearance. However, I would have utilised them more than they were in this entry given the core audience wanted the iconic scares and screams, and it did feel lacking in places, particularly around the fort building scene. But to the movie's credit, the time we spent with the spirits were the most intriguing parts for me, as you can tell these kids have become embittered, mature and vicious thanks to Afton's corruption of them. But once around Abby, they revert to an almost childlike state, acting fast to engage with her, and my interpretation of their desire for her, I think, stems from William invading their minds. Now, that's a good element that I did love from this, but let's dive into a story beat I was underwhelmed by but didn't dig away at me as much as possibly my least favourite aspect of this movie did that I'll get into in just a moment, by taking a second to discuss William Afton himself. The eventual big bad revealed to us in a manner that felt less surprising than one of Phineas and Ferb's latest designs, was initially revealed to us as being Mike's counsellor Steve Raglan. It all felt especially tacked on in the grand scheme of it all and became forgettable till the end with Vanessa's bizarre connection to him.
That just makes no fucking sense.
Over the course of the movie, we're thrown an awful lot to remember as well, like Mike's investigation of Garrett, who the killer is, Vanessa's relation to this, why the kids are so stoic, why does Max desire a ring, Jane's pursuit of Abby, to the fucking bots themselves, and a partridge on a fucking pear tree.
There's so fucking many.
It's a lot to keep up with, and admittedly an ambitious attempt to present this more than just a supposed slasher, but they really needed to ease the pressure off the pedal for a moment and refine what the output was, which is why I was saying at the beginning of this review they could have stripped this back to be less involved and have a good time with it and save a little for later in a sequel. And it's this attempt to balance so many aspects that honestly keeps you hooked. But by the credits, you're left scratching your head as this movie didn't answer everything or make time to do so or save a little for later, as I said. Moments like Afton's reveal felt rather lackluster and underwhelming because this movie was written to juggle too much, that we never received any evident nods in the right direction unless you were really paying attention, which after a few watches I did spot, but for a movie like this it just needs to be a little more clear cut and easy to follow, because initially connecting the dot between Steve offering a job, the resistance to say Mike's full name, and the shitty attitude could make him appear to know something about Garrett Schmidt, but not be the killer himself. This is a horror movie, there are creeps in it all the time.
It all makes sense now.
But following that, the drawings of the yellow rabbit were seeded throughout, like with Blonde Boy drawing him in the mud as a clue for Mike, but that never felt particularly relevant until Vanessa's reveal at the end of being his daughter, which, when I was first watching this, I could hear people saying, oh, maybe he's the spirit in the suit, so I wasn't the only one not to connect the dots.
Well, you got me. By all accounts, it doesn't make sense.
But then we get the big reveal of Springtrap, I believe, which is actually Steve Raglan aka William Afton in the suit from Vanessa's picture as a little girl. It's stupidly clever when you see it, but upon a first watch, it just felt needlessly convoluted and contrived. I think the intention was to get you questioning it, but something just doesn't sit right with me in how they presented all of this. Like if you told me Steve Raglan was just William Afton from the offset, and then I proceeded to watch the movie, I'd still be scratching my head throughout, wondering how we got from point A A to point B. This might feel like a bit of a nitpick for many, but it's something I hope the writers work on for the sequel should they try to pull something like this again, as more often than not, the killer in a horror movie is a central focus and we tend to see things through his or her eyes, which we never did with William, but this just didn't land as effectively as I think I should have accepted it as. But moving on to the part of this movie that made no fucking sense to me, that if it was dropped, I doubt it would have made a difference to the rest of what was going on, is Aunt Jane and her ceaseless desire for Abby. Now I understand this plot point was placed in there to put the pressure on Mike and add the dramatic tension, as it kept the plot moving with a connection to Max and her pals that led to the investigative action from Vanessa and so on and so forth. But for all the time they put into Jane's involvement to even have her part written in this, you'd have thought she had a greater reason to be a part of it other than a cathartic kill that we didn't even get to see. And when I say that she could have been removed and it wouldn't have made a difference, you could have literally switched the break-in sequence as a consequence of Mike rejecting Max over what I thought was initially an unrequited love story based on her comment over the ring, and feeling hurt, she takes revenge on him by trying to get him fired or something. But no, we ran with a side story about Mike's relationship being strained even deeper with his little sister when the dude is already trying his best with her by some bitchy old aunt who wants a monthly pay cut so bad she's willing to destroy his life over it. And for most of the film, she's not even there until Mike goes off for a quick jaunt in his dreams and Blonde Boy says nope and off with her head.
Oh, for fuck's sake.
She was quite possibly the most pointless addition to this entire movie. She never once seems driven or motivated by anything specifically other than what Mike hints about with the checks at the beginning, and she goes out like a punk without ever displaying any dimensions to her character and just seems hellbent on making Mike's life miserable, which makes her worse than fucking William in some ways because at least he finished a job.
Not a great plan.
Again, this might be a nitpick in the long run, but in amongst the countless other elements going on, like Abby's connection to the spirits at Freddy's without ever going there before that never got an answer either, they could have saved several minutes of screen time for something contextually deeper and meaningful to the story by removing her completely. Moving away from some of the glaring points though, I might sound ambivalent towards this, but I promise I'm not. I have enjoyed watching this movie each time I've settled in for it. I just somehow seem to find more that I love from it and more that I would wipe from it each time, which is often the case with most movies. But this, as I said before, is a solid showing. That, as I've said, raises several questions by the credits, like why did the writers think that the thought building scene was a smart idea given the tone of this movie, or how is Abby connected to the spirits before meeting them, or even how has Afton got such a hold over the spirits, and is Cupcake in possession of his own spirit, or is he just an extension of Chica? We'll never know, but you can certainly kick back and have a laugh.
Comedy.
There are themes explored throughout this that I really enjoyed, like the power of imagery for children and how that connects the dots between the children coming to terms with who their killer actually was and how they got there. It was one of the few moments that I honestly said that's clever, as it was a throwaway line earlier in the movie but came back in a big way by the end to help the kids and give our protagonists an exit from the crumbling ruins of a burial ground. Shaggy puts in a great performance as Stephen William, playing this eerily realistic psychopath whose motivation and reasoning is also missing from this but was effective in getting you unsettled. However, I would have preferred it if the use of Springtrap was more involved throughout this, just to give Mike a more lethal combatant throughout.
Zoinks! 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 Zoinks!
Josh Hutcherson delivers in a leading role as well, displaying exhaustion, trauma and ferocity extremely well, and made a believable protagonist out of Mike that I'd be happy to see in a sequel. Though the build-up throughout the movie surrounding Garrett could have used a little more oomph as well, as I appreciate the idea of him letting him go for his sister was profound, but I would have loved some indication of where Garrett's body went as maybe a means to insert Mike organically in the sequel. But before I get out of here, I can't forget to pass a mention over to Vanessa, who you could argue is a little jarring in places but is equally compelling, as she has a devotion to the lost souls inside of Freddy's and tries to protect them and let them be kids again, telling Mike to just carry on as normal, but then that's rivaled with her indoctrination from William, where she actively keeps Mike in a physical purgatory by withholding information that he could use to protect himself and still isn't particularly forthcoming when Abby's brought into it. She's portrayed brilliantly and there's a psychological breakdown that you could run of her character, but it's a little conflicting at times because before you realise her connection to all of this, the movie makes it seem that she's almost morally ambiguous. And what's worse is she knows what will become of Mike and Abby and initially refuses to battle against it when Mike goes back for his sister. And I can understand that there would be a degree of fear there, but pick up a bloody weapon, woman! So it leaves me a little up in the air with her character's direction sometimes, but she was still rather engaging. And I will say this, Elizabeth Lale does an excellent job at conveying so much within Vanessa's eyes, which will be a huge aspect to her in the sequel if things go the way that I theorised from her character in the games.
Good times.
There is a convenience to this movie for sure, where Mike is rushed with the job of security, then the meaning of imagery for children, which helps with the final portion of the film, unless we forget Vanessa just exposition dumping on him everything he could have discovered through a little research, or Steve could have told him in a meeting. However, the time spent with Freddy and the gang is genuinely fun. I wouldn't say it's for heavy investment unless you understand the lore, but it's a comfortable starting point for anyone interested in continuing the franchise or looking deeper into the world of FNAF. Everything had a shakiness to it in its structure and usage of time, but I would recommend this to anyone looking for an easy watch and generally safe title for 10 and up. However, that leaves me to say that I'm going to get the fuck out of here and say thanks for stopping by. If you enjoyed this video, do hit the thumbs up and share it around, subscribe for more reviews like this down the road, and until next time everyone, take care, and I will catch you later.